The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, welcome to the SCDM webinar State of the Industry 2020. My name is Maria and I am the SCDM Education Coordinator. We have the chance to have Michael, current chair and board member of SCDM, to present us the webinar today. It will last 1 hour and it will be followed by a 30-minute question and answer session approximately. All along the presentation and the question and answer session, the question box will be available for you to ask any doubts you would like Michael to answer by the end of the webinar. In order to ensure the quality of the presentation, right now the microphones will be muted. This way we will all be able to hear the presentation clearly and properly. Should you encounter any technical issues, please do contact me through the chat box or by email at learning@scdm.org. So, Michael, it is over to you if you would like to go ahead with the webinar.
Thank you so much, Maria. And good morning, good day, and good afternoon to everybody on the call. Welcome to this year's 2020 SCDM State of the Industry Address. It's a nice tradition that has started a few years back to allow the sitting SCDM chair to address industry, clinical data managers and beyond to talk about opinions and where we are in the industry, the role of the clinical data manager, and what SCDM is doing to continue to support our profession in clinical data management. How I've outlined my webinar and presentation today is that I wanted to provide an opinion, an outlook on when SCDM and myself see the industry where we are today, certain trends, and how those trends and what we're seeing around us is affecting the clinical data manager and what kind of a path forward and what kind of opportunities there are for clinical data management. I would like then to put SCDM in the mix and see what kind of resources our global society has in place and will be putting in place over this year and the next years to tie all of this together. I want to start with a brief introduction of myself. My name is Michael Goedde. I've been in clinical research and in the industry for now a little bit more than 28 years. Most of that time was all in the data world, within statistical programming, clinical data management, database design, worked for big and small sponsor companies and for CROs. My current assignment is I'm the Vice President and Head of Global Data Operations at PRA Health Sciences, and quite passionate about our profession and our job, which is also the reason why 17 years ago I joined the Society of Clinical Data Management as a member. One of the first people to become certified when the certification became available in late 2005, and have the privilege right now since beginning of 2017 to serve on the board of trustees, last year as the vice chair, and for 2020 now as a chair as well. Throughout my career, and why I spent some time on this introduction, being close to data and seeing the responsibility and accountability that we have as clinical data manager, making sure that clinical studies that are being conducted come to the right conclusion, to the right ending in terms of clinical results in clinical study reports, is a huge responsibility, which definitely as an individual like to embrace and would like to continue to promote the profession in my role and going forward as well. So where are we today as an industry? There are many ways to look at it. There's a patient perspective, there's a clinical trials perspective, there's a society perspective. So I wanted to provide some insights and different angles in terms what I've seen in my experience and where we are today, and hopefully give a little bit of outlook where the journey might go. So starting with the technology and clinical trials perspective, I didn't want to go too far in the past, but just to set the stage a little bit and start with something maybe more tangible. I would think that many of the people in the audience of this webinar do recall or were part of the transition from the more analog environment to what's now a more digital environment, or from paper to the more electronic environment, be it EDC and beyond. Some of us might recall the paper questionnaires, 3-part NCR, barcodes, faxing, DCFs, data clarification forms around the world last minute. And I think there is maybe a relief or some pride that we as an industry did move into the digital, into the internet world, into the more electronic world many years ago, more than a decade ago, in fact. However, if we look at the other side of the coin, the critical questions have to be asked to see what kind of tangible improvements did that step from paper to electronic actually bring. I do recall that over many years right now, there's always two numbers floating around in terms of how long does it actually take us as an industry to bring a new drug to market and how much does it cost. The time that is being put out there in different journals and white papers always hovers around 10, 11, 12, sometimes going up to 15 years. I've never seen it being reported as less than 10 years. And the cost, I do recall in the early times of my career being under $1 billion, sometimes 600 million, 800 million. It seems to be increasing over time, where one of the maximum ranges I've seen recently was going even into the $2 billion range. So maybe 1.5 billion might be an accurate estimate, obviously depending on therapeutic areas as well. So again, the critical question has to be asked that despite some of those advances in the technology sector, it did not seem to really materialize in saving a lot of time and definitely not saving us a lot of money. There's not been a significant change in the mindset or the paradigm on how clinical trials have been conducted over the last 4 decades. However, we also have to acknowledge that from a patient's perspective, some truly impressive breakthroughs have been accomplished despite the enormous price tag and despite still taking more than a decade to get to that. So just as an example, metastatic melanoma, the 5-year survival rate just a decade ago was around 5%. And with new immuno-oncology drugs being researched and developed and brought to market, that survival rate from a great perspective, from a patient's perspective, has been able to increase by tenfold to over 50% right now in terms of the 5-year survival for metastatic melanoma. Again, great breakthrough. It looks fantastic. Many patients were able to benefit just from this one example, and there are many others out there. However, there's again a critical question that needs to be asked here. Could we have been faster? So why did it take us as an industry 10 years to go from something that absolutely clearly is saving patients' lives right now? What could we as data management professionals do or in the industry to drive change that brings these kinds of either directly life savings or at least life improving drugs to the market? It also emphasizes the message that in our industry, even though studies last years, every day counts to bring those life-saving drugs to patients. Taking a different perspective, clinical trials and patients, which one of the key messages that I want to get out with this webinar is the mindset of a clinical trial, or how as an industry roll those out. Going to some of the data sources like clinicaltrials.gov, you'll be able to see that over the last 10 years, looking at the time frame from 2009 to 2019, there has been an almost 4-fold increase of the number of clinical studies. However, sites and hospitals participating, so research hospitals participating in those clinical studies, has remained pretty steady. So there has not been an increase there, which means that more studies have to be pushed to almost the same amount of sites competing against each other, and definitely not helping with enrollment rates. So coming to those enrollment rates, as an average in terms of studies over the last decade, of course, huge fluctuations between therapeutic areas, regions, and approaches to those. But the literature seems to suggest that the average enrollment rate is of half a patient per site per month, or looked at it differently, it's about 6 patients per site per year. So if we wanted to run just a quick example here, if you had a very promising drug in your pipeline approaching phase 3, a phase 3 study with 600 subjects, you would have to engage with 100 sites, hoping that all of those sites can enroll on that rate here, and it would still take you 1 year to complete enrollment, plus then, of course, the treatment of whatever number of months will be required for that drug here. 100 sites are many sites, which would most likely require a global study, a huge investment, huge cost there. More realistically, might be 50 sites, but then you're talking about a 2-year enrollment period. So when we talk about saving time in drug development, a 12-month study from a dosing perspective will last 12 months. There does not seem to be a lot of opportunity to shorten that. The times before studies start around protocol development and getting databases live, there might be some wiggle room to save some days, maybe weeks after that. And after the study is conducted, to get those results to regulatory agencies and to prove, there might also be some minor wiggle room to expedite that. However, the big item here where time definitely can be saved is in the enrollment part, meaning how can we make sure that more patients out there can participate in clinical trials? Again, one of the key parts of this presentation to make this point clear. To illustrate it from a different angle is only 8% of cancer patients in the US participate in clinical trials, and that's obviously for oncology. Other therapeutic areas are even below that threshold. Puts in other words, about 95+% of patients with a disease where potentially better drugs being investigated are not even aware that those clinical trials are happening or don't have access to those clinical trials there. Something that clearly we as an industry failed to be able to provide those potentially benefiting drugs to those patients. 80% of clinical trials do not meet their designated patient enrollment deadlines. So despite the best projections, despite enrolling or reaching out to many sites, activating those sites, enrollment typically in 80% of the cases takes even longer than those already projected long times. And huge effort, a lot of money going in training those sites, bringing them up to speed, but more than 10% of sites fail to enroll even a single patient. So it seems to be almost a waste of money and time putting so much effort when it comes to clinical trials in considering the sites as the center when it comes to clinical studies. Think about the patients. So why is it that patients don't participate more often? One very easy logistical reason is travel time. If for a given study, you have to go to a site on a daily, on a weekly basis for many months, sometimes years, taking time out of work, considerable travel times. It is potentially not convenient for patients, or just the fact that they might not be aware of those clinical studies. Looking at patients and maybe beyond as a society as well, just to span the scope a little bit broader as well. 2019 has been an interesting year from a population perspective. We have about 85 million millennials. This is a generation, as per definition, born between 1981 and 1996. So basically the 24 to 38-year-olds. This generation has in 2019 been surpassed globally by Gen Z or Gen Z, those born after 96, so basically being 24 years or younger. This means that 2/3 of our global population is a generation that does not know a world without internet. This is a generation, and for those parents in the audience with children or teenagers or young adults can definitely attest to it, spend their day in the internet with their smartphones. Many activities, be it banking, social media, shopping, watching videos is what happens there. Interesting enough, when it comes to health and clinical research, we as an industry have not really caught up into this space yet and are definitely falling behind other industries. On the right-hand side of this slide, in terms of the blue and darker blue bar chart, you can see that in the age span of 18 to 29, almost half of that population doesn't even have a primary care physician anymore. It shows that the way medicine is being practiced is changing from generation to generation, and it's about time that we as an industry realize that change and adjust and lead accordingly. So what does it all mean for our industry? As alluded to before, potentially life-saving drugs or life-improving drugs are not available for patients. And when I say not available, it's not really 100% true. They are available, they are out there, but we can't bridge the gap for making those drugs sooner available to those patients. Putting in different words, according to Janet Woodcock, the director of CDR at FDA, the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, she said we must bridge clinical research and healthcare, or the entire enterprise is going to fall down. How I interpret these words is that there is the real world out there, and again, people in our industry, we heard about real world data, real world evidence. We have more studies going in that direction, but we don't always mimic the real world scenarios in our clinical trials there. There's an opportunity for us to learn from the real world and the real world data and make our clinical trials more appealing for patients. The traditional approach for clinical research has not really changed, as I mentioned, in the last 4 decades, and it's about time to do so, and definitely an opportunity for data management to play in role of that. There has been a lot of talk in recent years around patient centricity, and it sounded fantastic and true and honest efforts to put the patient in the middle of our efforts. However, if you truly look at it, it's usually patients enrolling in clinical studies and how can we make that patient-centered, which is a good effort, but it only looks at 5% of those total patient populations that are out there, not on the other 95%. So there's a huge opportunity for us as an industry to reach out to all patients. If we want it or not, everybody is at some point in time a patient for sure for certain medical conditions that we could benefit on to get the absolute best treatment that is out there. Technology to enable us to go in that direction is out there since 10+ years in terms of internet connectivity, data transfers, data volumes that we can manage now. There's no excuse. And sometimes it's being used that regulatory agencies might be slowing it down. I can attest here that through SCDM and our interactions with regulatory agencies, not just the FDA, but European agencies, the MHRA, even Chinese FDA, there is a lot of openness to engage in dialogue to say, what can we do to expedite this process? So I don't always like to talk about paradigm shifts, but in preparation for this talk and looking through materials and research and white papers, it becomes more and more apparent that we're missing out on a huge opportunity to expedite and make our clinical research quicker. To bring it maybe down to one sentence is that over the past decades, thinking about clinical trials, the effort seems to be, how can I find patients that somehow fit my quite restrictive protocol inclusion-exclusion criteria to a clinical site quite often and do the assessments there, where I think our thinking should start being in terms of how can I bring the clinical trials to the patients. So in the opposite direction, rather than patients to clinical trials to patients. So moving on then, in terms of the path forward for clinical data management, what does that mean for clinical data management? I truly believe that we evolved over the past decades for what has been seen as a very technical function, fighting for our equal seat at the table, that based on the opportunities and landscape that I just talked about, is that we are not bystanders anymore. We are not just sitting at the same table. Based on our backgrounds, based on our proximity to data, our typical technical background, we can take a lead role to make this happen for the patients all around the world. So I do believe that with our typical clinical data management background, we can be the stewards of driving this change, this paradigm shift. So as you know, it's all about the data. The quite complicated graphic here, if you think about it going from the top right circle further down to the bottom left circle, the more traditional approach being in the hospital. If we as data management could work with our colleagues and see if there are ways to improve clinical protocols where there might be data assessments, clinical assessments that don't have to happen in the hospital. Is it something that has been done in a clinic? Is it something where, based on claims data in the community, going to your local drugstore, filling your prescription, that data is available. Companies are selling that data. Are there things that a patient could be in home talking or hinting towards ePro, electronic patient reported outcomes, any sort of eCOA, e-consent technology? Why does a patient have to come in just to read an informed consent and provide a written signature? Why can't we engage with that patient the same way this patient is watching movies, ordering their shopping list, and so on? And lastly, hinting towards on the body of the patient directly, wearables, in terms of collecting data right at the source, hinting towards e-source and more reliable data coming our way. This is a huge challenge, and to be clear, not every therapeutic area, not every study might be suitable to have the full gamut out there in terms of data. But we have many, many more tools in our toolbox now to do clinical research. And we should not just use the one tool that we're all used to in terms of sending patients to the sites, collecting data there traditionally, and wait for long enrollment curves to happen. One key word, I think, for SCDM and our community is to embrace this opportunity, not be a bystander, and see how we can lead towards that, our colleagues in clinical research. I would be dismissive in terms of not addressing one trend that is becoming quite apparent in recent conferences when it comes to SCDM industry trends, white paper around the transition from clinical data management to clinical data science. Just putting some perspective around that with a rather complicated, but I think quite telling slide, and going through it into some details. The way that I sometimes think about it, and again, going back to more traditional clinical data management, it was perceived as a quite technical job, setting up databases, a very traditional model, managing data, that it makes it from A to B. Have you seen over the last slides, our environment of clinical studies? There's the opportunity, and again, some companies are already exploring options in terms of how can we make our studies faster from an enrollment perspective, easier for patients, and so on. So it becomes a more complicated environment from a data flow, data integrity perspective, which is this move into clinical data science. So maybe starting at the top of this visually here is a more yellowish kind of boxes. It says synthetic arms. What the industry typically refers to it is to, if you were to have a traditional randomized study where you have an investigative drug compared to standard of care, there might be, and in all likelihood, and we've seen that already, many studies that have been done with this standard of care in the literature, which can be referenced. So rather than having this hypothetical study of 600 patients where 300 are on the investigational drug and 300 on the standard of care, sample sizes could be reduced in certain settings to just use the already existing data and not expose 300 patients in that case to what could be potentially a substandard treatment compared to the investigational drug. Why expose patient to all this routine and burden if the answer for that arm in the study is already well documented, for example, in the literature? These things are already happening on a small scale. They could be happening on a bigger scale. Studies have become more complicated. Umbrella, platform, basket, umbrella being testing multiple drugs for one indication. Platform, maybe the most complicated approach here, trying to save time, squeeze more information in clinical studies, testing multiple drugs for multiple indication, or basket studies where you have one drug that is being tested in multiple indications. Doesn't make the life of a clinical data manager easier. However, if it can save time to know which drugs work best in which setting for which indications, again, we have to embrace this from our profession. Going to the left-hand side, the more bluish kind of circles, basically what I mentioned on the previous slide is moving away from the traditional mindset that everything has to happen within the hospital, going more towards decentralized clinical studies. Decentralized does not mean that patients never see a doctor. For certain therapeutic areas, absolutely they have to go there. There might be certain complexities around dosing and drug administration. However, if we were to be able to shorten a 10-visit study to a 3 or 4 visit study, more patients might be considering joining this study, again, helping us with our enrollment curves. I already talked about sensors and variables and the full spectrum of eCOA. Going forward, data or the percentage of data coming from traditional EDC systems, which still need then to be source data verified to a certain degree, even if we wanted to take a risk approach, I believe that there will be many, many more data coming from different sources, which again, we as data managers can and should embrace to make sure that basic quality considerations are being met. Lastly, on the right-hand side, maybe just to touch on artificial intelligence as a whole. Again, it's another buzzword that is not that new. We have heard that much earlier as well, but technology has evolved. Artificial intelligence definitely based on bigger data, more data coming in. We can handle now those data. Still, from a data management perspective, we have to make sure that it's being applied in the right areas. A good area seems to be risk assessment. With more data coming in more real time, putting certain safety gates with artificial intelligence to be able to mitigate risk, detect risks quite early, seems to be a perfect environment to have artificial intelligence help us as an industry. So this is a rather complicated slide, and in situations like that, I sometimes like to go back to basics and fundamentals. And one thing that I would like to express here is that, yes, our industry has to change. I think a paradigm shift is happening as we speak. However, certain fundamentals when it comes to clinical data management, honestly, we should never forget. First of all, from a functional perspective within our respective companies, regardless if we're on the sponsor side or CRO side or technology vendor or academia, the ultimate accountability of data integrity is within our functions. We have to understand how data is being collected and transferred and analyzed and through the whole process. So if we just think about oversimplifying a little bit, the fundamental flow of clinical research and clinical studies, you have still a clinical protocol, even in the most advanced setting where you might have a synthetic arm and most of your data is being collected right from variables from a patient. So you still have this clinical protocol outlining this, hopefully optimized and improved to the absolute maximum to reduce the patient burden, but you still have the clinical protocol. You still have to collect data, maybe not so much on paper anymore or EDC and more efficient, but there's still data gathering. Even referencing a synthetic arm is a form of data collection. And after that, this data needs to be reviewed to make sure it's accurate and it meets regulatory and data integrity standards, that whatever was collected there does reflect reality. Typically, we refer to this as data cleaning, but we want to, I think, move away from data cleaning, data review more being defined as data validation on the one hand, and data analytics, making sure that on a micro level, on an item level, we can stand behind our data, and overall on a trend level to make sure that sites, regions, countries are trending in the direction that we were expecting, and if not, that we take action there. And ultimately, all of that would lead to the data analysis and the clinical study report, and hopefully to a successful submission. So if you now compare the boxes in red and the boxes in green, representing the more traditional and current approach, and maybe the path forward, the current approach is the traditional randomized study design. Patients come on site, we do SDV or targeted SDV, and we send our queries out, and then it goes into the data analysis part. From a path forward perspective, and this is where data management can help, already on the protocols stage, protocol optimization is not just a clinical task, not just a regulatory task, a medical writing task. Understanding a visit schedule, understanding what data is being collected, with our background in terms of technology, we can suggest how to mimic what's going on in the real world for patients in our clinical setting, and see if we can expedite the data collection part without losing data integrity. It's a shift from the on-site data collection to closer to the patient or the already existing data. And rather than relying more and more on the tedious SDV querying part, all this data closer to the patient in home, if we can bridge the gap in terms of reliability and making sure that it's truly the patient from where this data is coming from, we are so much closer to e-source data and real-time access to data, which will expedite our research. Borrowing a slide from a recent webinar on how to become a better lead data manager, I felt compelled that as it tied in nicely in terms of the role of the clinical data manager, and I'm purposely saying clinical data manager rather than clinical data scientist, even though there's a lot of science behind, just because there's more name recognition behind the term CDM than potentially CDS going forward. However, usually trying to illustrate the three dimensions of this role, that there clearly is a clinical component, or there should be, and if there is not, hopefully training is being offered for those individuals to be fully successful in their role, is to be able, as I just mentioned, understand the protocol, make suggestions on further on how to improve it, and the day-to-day activities, be it coding, being able to see are there any efficiencies to be gained there as well, or being also a productive contributor when it comes to, for example, investigator meetings. The technical background becoming more important as well. There seems to be a trend in the industry, maybe I'm not sure if it's just my limited spectrum on lead data managers that I've seen over the last 10 plus years, but almost a move away from this technical background, where not many LDMs being so close to, for example, EDC databases. I do think that we have to reverse this trend, bringing our clinical data managers closer back to see what kind of opportunities do I have to use technology to its fullest to get closer to e-source and collect data quick in a more reliable way as well. And lastly, in terms of project management skills, it's the well-rounded clinical data manager that understands the clinical study from a clinical and from a technical perspective, but then to become or are a productive member of the overall study team to lead the activities we have to lead, to be influential, to make sure that from a regulatory perspective, documentation perspective, for example, the data management plan, we are compliant as well. So again, as a well-rounded clinical data manager, we might have strength in one or two of those areas, but all three should be represented. Even though when those three components of a clinical data manager are represented, we're talking about being influential here. We're talking about driving or being a steward for this change, even with all this background equipped, and people leaving this and maybe other webinars or coming to SCDM conferences and being all energized by it. When it comes to soft skills, hugely important to definitely be a driver of that change, to assume the accountability that this role, being a clinical data manager, brings with it, to be able to communicate about the challenges for a given study and how to address that, to have the confidence to say, hey, for example, I'm certified, I know the good clinical data management practices book, I engage with regulatory authorities, I know that what we're suggesting here is okay from a regulatory perspective to do that. Have the sense of urgency. If the picture of this one patient in this slide doesn't drive sense of urgency, I don't know what does. It is true that every day counts. Whatever we can do to make this happen quicker, still in a data integrity environment, is crucial. And lastly, being proactive. It's not waiting for this change to happen, because it will happen. And I'm strongly suggesting that we'd rather try to be in the driver's seats than just following along. So moving on now to the third and last part of this presentation is, after showing the one way of looking at our industry landscape and the role that clinical data management is playing and might be able to play, what role is playing SCDM in all of this? How can we honestly help to drive this, to equip our professionals to become even more effective stewards of this change? Or how can we reach out even to other functions to make sure that they can see the value and work hand in hand with our profession to drive this change? Because again, it's a team effort. It's not about us in data management winning and somebody in another function losing. Obviously not. It's us as a team, as an industry, as a company, being able to drive that. So starting with our vision, leading innovative clinical data science to advance global health research and development. We have the clinical data science expression here, hinting towards that there is more out there in our industry now with the recent technology advances that we have to embrace, and SCDM definitely having this vision that we provide the framework as stated in our mission to bring professionals together for global education, certification, advocacy through the different media we have, and I will go over what those are. Before going into the strategic outlook for the next 3 years, I wanted to use this opportunity to introduce people who might not be as close to the actual structure of SCDM. So we do have the Board of Trustees with the 5 executive members, which are, in addition to myself, the Vice Chair Sanjay Bhadvaj, the past Chair Linda King, our Treasurer and long-term member of the board Jonathan Andrews, and our current Secretary Jennifer Price. In addition to the EC, we have board members and appointees from different areas of the industry. We have technology companies represented, small and big pharma. We have CROs as well representative, and people from academia. So it's a good, I would call it, healthy mix to make sure that we don't approach our challenges just for one angle. So the newest addition to our board, Amy Neubauer, Reza Rostami, Deepa Kalabundi, Mariah, Angeline Quays, Mayang Anand, Carrie Zhang, Peter Stockman, Richard Ittenbach, and Meredith Sozus. So quite diverse group of people, great tenure, and it's definitely a pleasure and privilege to work together with this group. In addition, we do have a very distinguished group of people, which is our advisory panel. We instituted this about 2 to 3 years ago, with some of them having been past chairs very close to SCDM, and definitely ample industry experience helping the board and everybody around us to sometimes guide and ask critical questions. Dimitris Zambas, Hugh Donovan, Wayne Kubik, Johan Pröve, David Volcano, Robert Goodwin, Alec Vardy, and Paula Brown Stafford. It's great to be able to engage at least quarterly with these individuals to make sure that we are moving and driving in the right direction. Again, maybe more important than all of these are the hundreds of volunteers that are working currently on 16 different committees and task forces for SCDM, just out of their passion and, I would assume, sense of urgency to do something beyond their day jobs to drive our industry forward. So big shout out to all of our volunteers. Big thank you for your commitment and time to lead and be participants of different committees. Just to name some of them, the Innovation One, our GCDMP, eSource, Global Expansion, etc., driving our society. We couldn't do it without volunteers. Basically, fresh hot off the press, as we just had our face-to-face annual board meeting 2 weeks ago. The board, together with input from our advisory panel, came up with a 3-year strategy map for SCDM, being grouped into 3 main categories, being thought leadership, education, and advocacy. Those 3 areas tightly linked to our vision and mission statements. And on the right-hand side, together with a timetable where we absolutely realize that we can't achieve all 3 of them in year 1, so they are tailored over the next 3 years. It's a map, it's a strategy that can be adjusted. There are a couple of clear priorities, and you see on the left-hand side, GCDMP being definitely our number 1 priority to make sure that we keep this main document, our main reference of good practices, as up to date with industry trends as possible. This is honestly quite a challenge, as industry is moving quite fast, and we have also established now with the GCDMP, we want to reach a new level of quality in terms of making it closer to an evidence-based document rather than just a more opinion-based document there. So definitely increasing the value of GCDMP, having more peer-reviewed chapters there, and having editors and editorial boards making sure that our references there definitely hold truth to the challenges that we want to illustrate in this document. Furthermore, I will show a couple of white papers that have come out recently when it comes to education, obviously white papers as well. Quite excited about the offerings in terms of our annual conferences that we're having, our webinars, online courses, our certification program, now also I think going into year 15 of its existence here. It's a great program to show the dedication of our individuals when it comes to our profession. Lastly, our advocacy. I did already mention our advisory panel. Maybe most important to mention there are our now well-established ties to regulatory agencies. One proof of that is that we have now, since at least 10 years, likely more, a standing regulatory panel at our annual conference in the US. This is also true for other annual conferences. I recall last year for the European one that we had representatives from the European or different European agencies as well. And also to mention that some of the European regulators do join our annual conference in the US, so that we have this ongoing dialogue. This dialogue with regulatory representatives goes beyond just showing up once a year at our conferences. There's an ongoing dialogue of board members and advisory panel members with regulators to help each other out, provide opinions, review documents, be it draft guidelines in both directions. It's a huge plus that we were able to build those relationships over the last years. So going through the strategy, the different areas, thought leadership, just to mention a couple of the white papers that have come out over the last year, maybe starting on the right-hand side. One of the latest ones is the evolution of clinical data management, so clinical data sciences. It's an absolute great read. It is a lengthy document here, but I can assure you that if you have not read it yet, it's absolutely wonderful to go through it and quite thought-provoking. And I can tell that after you go through it, you will feel quite energized and energetic to go back to your respective companies and do even better work. There have been also white papers on the whole ESO spectrum and providing great insights there that I'm pretty sure we'll be able to use them in your day jobs as well. I want to point out Data Basics, one of our SCDM outlets, as a great reference for articles. There's also an initiative that has been triggered by the board in recent meetings to see if we can elevate Data Basics to a different standard when it comes to industry journals and papers. We don't want to make it more difficult for people to publish there. However, getting closer to the scientific mindset and be able to penetrate industry even broader to the thousands of data managers and beyond that out there, we're considering steps in terms of elevating Data Basics closer to a peer-reviewed journal threshold. And I already mentioned the continuous engagement with our regulatory agencies in terms of thought leadership and bringing this back through webinars and white papers to our membership and beyond. Talking about education, we have now for 2020, quite excited about it, our confirmed annual conferences in the US early in September in San Antonio. We know that for 2020, the big annual conference will be in December in Bangalore. For Europe, we are targeting the month of June for that conference. The location is still to be determined, but hopefully identified soon. And for China, we know that the annual conference is targeted to be in September, and the location is also still to be confirmed. But quite exciting that, of course, we have the long tradition in the US of our annual conferences. Definitely looking forward to again meet 800 plus, maybe even more, hopefully, industry professionals and exchange opinions. India, since a few years now, a great ramp up of single-day events, and then culminating in the main event, the annual conferences, with surpassing 400 attendees now last year, maybe even more now in 2020. A huge jump in Europe, moving from just a leadership forum. When I say just, I don't mean this in a bad way. It was a great starting point, but we wanted to expand it. And shout out to Peter Stockman, who is the driver behind that and being the main organizer behind a fantastic European conference last year. And I'm looking forward to the one in June coming up. And then China, huge market from all angles. Many data managers there that are definitely looking for and hungry for engaging in the global discussion and learn and share experiences as well. I did mention when it comes to education, GCDMP, our centerpiece, putting our resources, efforts there, and a tracking place to make sure that we can expedite the update of the outdated chapters that we still have, and also creating the new content to, as I mentioned before, keep up with the pace of our industry changes. There were many webinars planned for 2020. Just mentioning some of the examples is that we have webinars on drivers leading to the evolution of clinical data management to clinical data science. So a lot of talk around this move to clinical data science. I think it's good that we create content around this topic, that we can put it in perspective. What does it mean? What is changing for us? It's good to have those kinds of topics that hopefully will create great discussions and exchange of opinions in all of those forums going forward. What about the technology supporting this evolution to clinical data sciences? There have been some hints on these slides earlier when it comes around the wearables, the on-body wearables in terms of data collection, and other technologies that will be helping data managers move in this direction. And ultimately, again, it's all about evolving the role of data management and helping us to embrace this challenge. On the advocacy, we want to continue to expand our corporate partnerships. Those are partnerships of the Society for Clinical Data Management with industry partners, be it technology companies, pharma companies, CROs. It's a win-win for those. For SCDM, it's access to more people who are likely to want to volunteer for our committees. And again, we are an organization that relies on volunteers, so having a broader and more access and more visibility into those companies is great. And it provides those companies to make a statement to say, we see that data is at the core, at the center of our business. Not every company is saying or realizing this at some point in time, but eventually everybody will be catching on of it. It's great to see that more and more companies in fact do, and they want to make a statement and put their name behind a corporate partnership with SCDM to say, we believe in this, we want to be part of it, and putting their name out there. So it's a great initiative that has started a few years back, and we continue to expand and fine-tune it as well. And then there's the engagement with industry partners, meaning not corporations, but other societies that are out there that are also in the data space, maybe more prominent in different regions, even though SCDM globally right now, definitely one of the authorities when it comes to clinical data management, but we definitely want to engage with these partners. And then there are societies and organizations that are maybe not right in data management, but close enough to us around data, where we want to make sure that we don't see our approach in isolation, but it makes sense for the overall industry as we are moving forward. So in conclusion and in summary, saying the word again, it's embracing the opportunity. Truly feel privileged to be part of SCDM, being able to serve the board, serve the members, and serve our industry at a time where change is tangible. You see it every day, and we can do something about it. Having the privilege to work at a CRO and seeing different sponsors to approach, again, it's a privilege to be able to input when you see a traditional approach, which 10 years ago, nothing wrong about it, but there are so many more tools at our fingertips where we can go back to sponsors, or when you work as sponsors, go back to your teams to say, we can do this better and faster for the patients, and do something that's it's on us to do that. It's driving towards true patient centricity, and I think I made the point earlier, patient centricity, let's expand it. It's not just the 5% of people that might enroll for a clinical trial. It's to find a way to connect with the 95% of people out there that don't even know that those clinical trials exist. There has to be a way to engage those ones. And yeah, let's use all the technology that is at our disposal to its fullest, while of course keeping a healthy portion of skepticism and asking the right questions to say, can I stand behind this data? Does this actually happen? Will it hold the scrutiny of audits and regulatory review as well? So it's a interesting fine line we have to walk in clinical data management in terms of embracing all these opportunities, all those new tools we have in our tool set, but still not forgetting about our fundamentals and maybe getting overly excited about what those technologies might be able to help us do. And ultimately, and it's not just a phrase, I do believe that if we can cut down on enrollment, reaching out to patients, expediting clinical research, so that this one metric about 10 plus years and $1.5 billion or whatever it might be, in a few years from now, might be only 6 or 7 years, maybe less, and costing less than $1 billion, we will have saved lives by then of loved ones, be it your parents, your siblings, your children, your friends, and so on. This is what's at stake for us at this point in time. And honestly, when it comes to saving lives, the stakes couldn't be higher. I would like to conclude with some acknowledgements, and it's a great opportunity to thank a very special person for me in the industry, Hugh Donovan. I do consider him my key mentor, who was on my side for the most part of my professional career. I would definitely not be where I am without him. So big thank you to Hugh for everything he's doing for the industry, for SCDM still as part of the advisory panel. That's really outstanding. So big thanks to you. We thank Ken Turkey. He was the keynote speaker of the SCDM conference last year in Baltimore, and who allowed me to use some of his material and information for that presentation. So thank you, Kent. And Patrick Nadolny has many talents, definitely right now leading our innovations task force. I also do call him Mr. PowerPoint, his amazing PowerPoint slides, and I did borrow, I think, at least 2 slides from his repertoire. So Patrick, thank you for that. And lastly, the MCI team. For those who are not familiar, MCI is the organization that is supporting SCDM on everything when it comes to annual conferences, the administrative part, and so on. Again, reminding everybody that we are all volunteers here. Nobody's doing this full time. So we rely on organizations such as MCI. It's a multi-year relationship. Thank you so much to the MCI team as well. With that, I would like to say a big thank you to all of you for your attention here. And if there are questions, comments, criticism, feedback, I'm open for all of it. If you don't have a chance to get a question in the next half hour, I did provide both of my email addresses there. Feel free to use either of those ones if you wanted to reach out. And again, open for any feedback out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael, for sharing this presentation with all of us. It was very clear, detailed, and interesting. So I guess there may be many comments or questions from the attendees. So feel free again to ask those on the question box that you will find in the panel, in the GoToWebinar panel. Okay, I see that we've got some already. So I see a suggestion here. So need more webinars being scheduled. This would be one way to help society. Maybe same topic can be repeated multiple times during the year to cover more members throughout the globe. Thank you.
I have a quick comment on that. So with the webinars, it comes down also to finding volunteers who want to put in the time to prepare for it and hold the webinar. That's one thing. So that's the second comment. I think we're doing that already, that the webinars that are being held are part of the SCDM archive and can be accessed. So if there were groups of people, organizations who might have missed it, or you know people that, hey, you might be able to benefit from it, if you reach out to SCDM, you should be able to get back to the content that already happened.
Indeed, the webinars are available for us on demand in our learning platform. So we have another question. So how is CDM certification trending among the SCDM membership, percentage of members, and is there any data on the evaluation of the certification? Thank you.
I do not have the percentage of how many of our memberships are certified. I think it's a good question, maybe something that we should consider to maybe as a reference put on our webpage or make it more accessible. What I can tell you is that talking to colleagues in the industry, I see a trend in more and more people asking for it and meaning something to be a certified clinical data manager. It was not a very prominent thing in Europe, for example, but I can tell that in recent discussions with some thought leaders there, it's becoming more and more of a known certification and something that means something now that GCDMP definitely has established itself as a key reference to have it. What I can also say that keeping the certification up to date is a huge undertaking for the society. As the GCDMP is evolving, we have to make sure that the certification around it is evolving equally so that we are not out of sync the questions that are being asked in the test compared to what GCDMP is offering. Lastly, to make it easier for people to become certified, almost similar to the clinical trial. So rather than bringing people who want to do it to a testing center, which we have been doing until about 2 or 3 years ago, there's now an option to do it from home. So you're bringing the certification to your home, that you can do it in a controlled environment with your laptop camera, for example, and take the test from the convenience of your home.
Perfect. So I see another comment. It says, that's a very wonderful session, very informative. wanted to know more about SCDM certification.
I'm not sure exactly what the person asking this question wants to know more about certification. Again, if there are certain specific areas, please send me an email, and happy to tackle that directly. If not, on our webpage, scdm.org, there's a whole section on the certification, providing information on how to become certified, what the prerequisites and requirements are to become certified. When I say that, the requirements are not outrageously high or disqualifying many people. There's a minimum number of years of industry experience that are required, and so on. But it's relatively straightforward there on how to become certified. The threshold is, it's not very difficult to go through the process. What is difficult is the test itself. I can attest to that. So to be proficient within the GCDMP and having some degree of industry experience is definitely required to be successful with the test. If this doesn't answer the question, again, feel free to please send me an email with a more specific question. I'm happy to address it.
Perfect. I see another question here. So there is the new beta exam in development right now. When will that test will be available online?
I do not have the exact date on that. I do know that we're in the final stages in terms of going through the testing of the new questions. There's a whole scientific process behind to make sure that the sample questions that we have are correct and are yielding the right results. So it's a whole science behind it. We have volunteers. It's Mary de Souza, Swiss part of our board as an appointee, is looking into that. I do believe that we are quite close around the beta testing to release it to come out, and I would expect it to be in latest by Q2 of this year. I hope I'm not misspeaking here. I don't have the exact date, but it shouldn't be much longer to get all of those rolled out.
Perfect. So right now I don't see any more questions, but feel free to write them if you think of any other. Oh, okay. No, we've got another one then. Also wanted to know if there will be any sessions on artificial intelligence in the future.
There should be, I would think. What I do know is that at the annual conference, the last one we had in Baltimore and also in Berlin, there were tracks and sessions on artificial intelligence. So there is no webinar from the top of my head addressing that, so that's definitely a gap. If we had volunteers who can and want to talk about that, we would definitely be open about it. Having seen the very draft outline for the upcoming conferences, there will be ample sessions on artificial intelligence, what it means for clinical data management, which areas should we consider, and where would it make sense to deploy artificial intelligence, for example. I do believe that this could be a great topic for our innovation committee. And I'm pretty sure that if Patrick Nadal is in the audience or eventually will listen to this, that he will jump on this opportunity together with his group quite soon.
Yes, indeed. I have to say that at the end of 2019, there was a webinar that you can find us on demand of artificial intelligence in clinical data management.
Thank you, Maria, for filling my knowledge gap here.
Okay, I think that's it for now.
Okay, well then, big thank you again for the questions and for your time today. Looking forward to some feedback, maybe more questions through email, and hope to see and meet all of you at upcoming events for SCDM and beyond. Have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.
Perfect. Just as a quick reminder, if you would like to add any feedback, if you go online in our learning platform, in the webinar page, you will be able to find a satisfaction survey that we will be very happy to receive your comments and improve for the future. Okay, thank you very much.